The alarm bells rang through the bridge of the EFS Vengeance as Commander Jake Morrison rushed to his command chair. The massive human battlecruiser was patrolling the outer edge of Federation space when the distress signal came through. It was not just any signal, but one that made every human officer on the bridge stop what they were doing and listen. The voice belonged to a Zephyrian named Kelnara from the peaceful colony of New Haven. Her words came through the speakers, broken by static and fear. The Krex Dominion had arrived at their world with hundreds of ships. The insectoid warriors were burning their crystal cities and capturing their people. The Zephyrians had no weapons and no army. They were scholars and artists who had never hurt anyone in their long history. Captain Lisa Chen looked at the tactical display showing ship positions across the sector. 3 human battle groups were close enough to reach New Haven in just a few hours. The problem was that Earth was supposed to follow Federation rules. No military action without approval from the Council. That approval could take weeks or even months to get. Morrison remembered the food crisis of 2361 when Earth's outer colonies were starving. The Federation had offered sympathy and paperwork, while human children grew thin and weak. It was the Zephyrians who had loaded their cargo ships with food and medicine. They had asked for nothing in return except friendship. Now those same gentle beings were calling for help. The bridge crew watched their commander as he stared at the tactical screen. Lieutenant Ben Davis from the communications station spoke up. The Federation Council was already meeting about the crisis. They would discuss options and form committees. Meanwhile, the Krex were turning a peaceful world into a nightmare. Morrison had seen Krex handiwork before. The insectoid race conquered worlds not just for resources but for slaves. They turned entire populations into workers in their underground hives. Children disappeared into breeding programs. Adults were forced to work until they died. It was a fate worse than death. Chen stepped closer to Morrison and spoke quietly. The EFS Vengeance was the flagship of Battle Group 7. The destroyers EFS Hellhound and EFS Thunder were nearby. Battle Group 9 with the heavy cruiser EFS Reaper was only 6 hours away. They could reach New Haven before the main Krex fleet finished its work. The commander looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These were men and women who had joined Earth's military to protect the innocent. They had taken oaths to defend not just human colonies, but any peaceful beings who needed help. The Federation's bureaucracy was important, but there were times when action mattered more than paperwork. Morrison activated the ship's communication system and spoke to his entire crew. He told them about the Zephyrian distress call and the Krex invasion. He reminded them how the Crystal people had saved human children during the food crisis. Now those same people were dying while the Federation held meetings. The response from his crew was immediate and clear. Every department reported ready for combat operations. The weapons officer began charging the main guns. The fighter pilots ran to their ships. The Marines started checking their equipment. Nobody questioned the decision or worried about Federation approval. Chen contacted the other ships in their battle group. Captain Sam Rodriguez of the EFS Hellhound was already plotting jump coordinates to New Haven. The crew of the EFS Thunder had begun loading their torpedo tubes. Everyone understood what they were about to do and why it mattered. Morrison opened a secure channel to Admiral Kate Williams, who commanded Battle Group 9. Her flagship EFS Reaper was the most powerful warship in the human fleet. When he explained the situation, she did not hesitate. Her battle group would follow them to New Haven. The Federation could complain later after they had saved lives. The Zephyrian distress calls were getting weaker and more desperate. Their beautiful floating gardens were burning. The crystal spires that had taken centuries to grow were being shattered by Krex weapons. Families were being separated. As the invaders sorted them for different slave camps, Morrison thought about his own family back on Earth. His daughter Jenny was the same age as many of the Zephyrian children now hiding in shelters. If Earth were being invaded, he would want someone to help them. He would not want alien bureaucrats to form committees while his child was in danger. The commander gave the order that would change everything. All ships were to jump to New Haven immediately. They would arrive without Federation approval and without backup. 3 human battle groups against an entire Krex invasion fleet. The odds were terrible, but the cause was right. As the ships prepared for hyperspace jump, Morrison recorded a message for Earth Command. He explained his decision to intervene at New Haven. He took full responsibility for violating Federation protocol. If there were consequences, he would face them alone. His crew and ship captains were following his orders. The jump drives hummed to life as space began to bend around the human fleet. In a few hours, they would drop out of hyperspace at New Haven. They would face a Krex force that outnumbered them 10-1. But they would also show the galaxy what happened when someone threatened Earth's friends. The last transmission from New Haven came through just as the ships entered hyperspace. It was a Zephyrian child singing an old song about hope and friendship. The voice was small and scared, but still brave. Morrison closed his eyes and made a promise to that child and all the others like her. The monsters of Earth were coming to help. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Haven system, and what they saw made even veteran soldiers angry. Massive Krex dreadnoughts hung in orbit around the beautiful blue world like metal vultures waiting to feed. Each ship was the size of a small city with weapons that could crack open moons. Smaller Krex vessels swarmed around the planet like angry insects. Commander Morrison stood on the bridge of the EFS Vengeance and watched the tactical display update with enemy positions. The computer counted over 200 Krex ships of various sizes. His 3 battle groups had only 30 ships total. Any reasonable military commander would retreat and call for reinforcements, but Morrison was not thinking like a reasonable commander. He was thinking like a human whose friends were in danger. On the planet below, the crystal cities of the Zephyrians were burning. Their floating gardens had been turned to ash. Millions of peaceful beings were hiding in caves and shelters while Krex soldiers hunted them for sport. The Krex fleet commander was a massive insectoid warrior named Overlord Vexithak. His intelligence reports on humans described them as friendly mammals with decent technology, but limited combat experience. They had joined the Federation only 50 years ago, and seemed more interested in trade than warfare. The arrival of 3 small human battle groups seemed like a joke. Captain Lisa Chen studied the enemy formations and began planning their attack. The Krex ships were arranged in a standard invasion pattern with the big dreadnoughts providing cover for smaller vessels. It was a formation designed to overwhelm planetary defenses through brute force. Against most Federation species, it would work perfectly. But humans were not most species. They had spent thousands of years fighting wars against their own kind. Every weapon system on their ships had been designed by engineers who understood that combat was about killing the enemy before they could kill you. Human military doctrine was simple and brutal. Find the enemy's weakness and hit it until they stopped moving. Morrison opened a communication channel to the Krex fleet. His message was broadcast on all frequencies so every enemy ship could hear it. He identified himself as the commander of Earth Defense Force Battle, Group 7. He gave the Krex exactly one chance to surrender and leave the system peacefully. The response from Overlord Vexthak was exactly what Morrison expected. The Krex commander laughed at the human demand and called them foolish mammals who did not understand their place in the galaxy. He promised to add human slaves to his collection after he finished with the Zephyrians. Morrison smiled coldly and closed the communication channel. He had given the Krex a chance to leave peacefully. Now they would learn why Earth's history books were written in blood. He activated the fleet's tactical network and gave his captains their orders. The human ships did not charge forward with battle cries like the honor-bound Draknari warriors. They did not attempt complex negotiations like the bureaucratic Centauri. Instead, they did something that made the Krex pause in confusion. The entire human fleet went completely silent. Admiral Kate Williams had arrived with Battle Group 9 just as the ultimatum ended. Her flagship EFS Reaper was a monster of a ship with enough firepower to level a city, but even more dangerous than her weapons were her crew. These were humans who had trained their entire lives for this moment. The human fleet implemented something called Protocol 7. It was a combat doctrine that other Federation species considered too brutal for civilized warfare. But humans had learned long ago that there was nothing civilized about letting innocent people die while you worried about rules. Captain Tony Harper commanded the stealth cruiser EFS Shadow. His ship was designed to be invisible to enemy sensors while carrying enough firepower to cripple much larger vessels. He began moving through the Krex formation like a ghost in the night. His crew placed antimatter charges on key targets while the enemy had no idea they were there. Electronic warfare specialist Commander Amy Johnson took control of 3 human cruisers equipped with the most advanced jamming systems in the galaxy. Her job was to blind the Krex fleet and cut their communications. Within minutes, enemy ships were firing at shadows while their commanders screamed orders that nobody could hear. The Kreks had never faced an enemy like this. Their previous conquests had involved species that fought with honor and followed predictable patterns. They would announce their attacks and engage in formal combat. Humans ignored all of those rules and fought like the predators they had evolved to be. Captain Sam Rodriguez commanded the destroyer EFS Hellhound. His ship was small and fast with weapons designed for hit-and-run attacks. He led a squadron of similar vessels through the enemy formation, striking at vital targets and disappearing before the Kreks could respond. First major blow came when the Kreks command ship, Devastator, suddenly exploded from within. Captain Harper's stealth team had planted charges throughout the massive dreadnought and detonated them all at once. The ship that had been coordinating the entire invasion fleet became an expanding cloud of debris in seconds. Overlord Vexthak watched his command ship die and felt something his species had not experienced in centuries: fear. The humans were not fighting like civilized beings. They were hunting his fleet like animals. Every few minutes, another Krek ship would disappear or explode without warning. The human Marines prepared for planetary assault while their ships fought in orbit. Colonel Maria Santos had trained for this kind of operation her entire career. Rescuing civilians from hostile forces was one of the most difficult military missions possible. It required precision and speed that most species could not match. But humans had been rescuing their own people from impossible situations for thousands of years. They had developed techniques and equipment that turned suicide missions into routine operations. The Kreks were about to learn that invading a world with human friends was the worst mistake they could make. Morrison watched the battle unfold on his tactical display and felt a cold satisfaction. The Kreks had chosen to threaten innocent beings and enslave children. Now they would face the consequences of that choice. Earth's monsters had awakened and they were hungry for justice. The Kreks learned their first lesson about human warfare when their mighty command ship simply vanished from their sensors. Captain Tony Harper had spent 20 minutes moving through their formation like an invisible predator. His stealth cruiser EFS Shadow had planted antimatter charges on every critical system of the Devastator without anyone noticing, when the massive dreadnought tore itself apart from within. The entire Kreks fleet felt something: new terror. These humans did not fight with honor like the Draknari or follow rules like the Centauri. They hunted their enemies like the predators they had evolved to be on a world where everything tried to kill everything else. Overlord Vexthak had conquered 17 worlds for the Kreks Dominion. He had faced every major species in the galaxy and defeated them all. But none of them had fought like this. None of them had made his ships disappear one by one, while his sensors showed empty space where the attackers should be. Admiral Kate Williams watched the battle unfold from the bridge of her flagship EFS Reaper. Every human captain in the fleet had studied the great military minds of their species. Sun Tzu had taught them that all warfare was based on deception. Napoleon had shown them how to concentrate force at the enemy's weakest point. Patton had proven that speed and aggression could overcome any defense. The humans were not just using superior technology. They were applying thousands of years of military wisdom that had been earned through countless wars on their homeworld. Every tactic they used had been tested in blood against other humans, who were just as smart and just as determined to win. Captain Sam Rodriguez led his destroyer squadron through the Kreks formation like wolves hunting sheep. The EFS Hellhound and her sister ships struck at enemy vessels and vanished before the Kreks could respond. They targeted communication arrays and sensor systems, leaving enemy ships blind and deaf. On the planet below, Colonel Maria Santos prepared her Marines for the most dangerous part of the operation. Rescuing civilians from an active war zone required skills that most species had never developed. But humans had been saving their own people from impossible situations since they first learned to fight. The drop pods launched from human ships in orbit and streaked toward the planet's surface like falling stars. But these were not normal drops that landed in open areas where the enemy could see them coming. Human pods burrowed deep underground and emerged, behind enemy lines where the Kreks least expected them. Lieutenant Ben Davis led his squad through the ruins of a crystal city that had once been home to millions of Zephyrians. The beautiful spires lay shattered on the ground while smoke rose from burning gardens. Krek soldiers moved through the wreckage looking for survivors to capture for their slave ships. Davis and his men moved through the ruins like ghosts, They had trained for urban combat on dozens of worlds and knew how to use every piece of cover to their advantage. When they found Krek soldiers threatening a group of Zephyrian children, the response was swift and lethal. The Kreks had tough armor and powerful weapons, but they had never faced human military technology designed by a species that specialized in killing its own kind. Human weapons punched through their protection like it was made of paper. Human explosives turned their formations into scattered body parts. Sergeant Amy Johnson found herself surrounded by 30 Kreks warriors in the ruins of a school. The insectoid soldiers demanded her surrender and promised to make her death quick if she complied. Her response was to activate a thermobaric charge that turned 3 city blocks into a crater. The explosion bought time for 200 Zephyrian civilians to escape to the underground shelters. When asked later why she had sacrificed herself for alien children, Johnson simply said that protecting the innocent was what humans did. It was not about species or politics, but about right and wrong. Back in orbit, the space battle continued with devastating results for the Krek's fleet. Captain Harper's stealth ships had eliminated most of their command structure. Electronic warfare specialist Commander Rick Thompson had turned their communication network into chaos. The mighty invasion fleet was falling apart ship by ship. But it was not just the tactical brilliance that made human warfare so terrifying. It was their absolute refusal to give up no matter how bad things looked. When human soldiers were outnumbered, they fought harder. When their ships were damaged, they became more dangerous. When facing impossible odds, they found ways to win anyway. The Kreks began to understand that they were not fighting ordinary soldiers. They were fighting a species that had turned warfare into an art form. Every human in this fleet was a master artist painting with the blood of their enemies. They used tactics that were too brutal for civilized beings and weapons that were too effective to be fair. Lieutenant Colonel Susan Baker led her Marines through the underground tunnels. Beneath the crystal cities, the Zephyrians had built these passages as transportation routes, but now they served as escape paths for terrified civilians. Baker's job was to clear them of Krek soldiers and keep them open. The fighting in the tunnels was close and brutal. Krek's warriors were deadly in confined spaces, but humans had been fighting in caves and sewers since they invented warfare. Baker's Marines moved through the darkness like demons unleashed from hell. They left no enemy alive and asked no quarter for themselves. On the surface, Captain Nick Foster coordinated the rescue of thousands of Zephyrian civilians. His tactical team had spent hours studying the Krek's deployment and finding weaknesses in their positions. Every rescue operation was planned with military precision and executed with ruthless efficiency. The Zephyrians watched in amazement as human soldiers risked their lives to save alien children. These warriors, who fought like monsters against their enemies, showed infinite gentleness toward the innocent. They carried wounded civilians to safety and shared their own supplies with hungry families. Overlord Vexthak realized that his invasion was failing completely. Half his fleet was destroyed or crippled. His ground forces were being systematically eliminated by an enemy that seemed to appear from nowhere. The humans were not just winning but making it look easy. The Krek's commander had one last desperate option. He ordered his remaining ships to begin targeting the Zephyrian cities directly. If he could not conquer the world, he would destroy it completely. The threat of civilian casualties would force the humans to retreat or at least negotiate. He could not have been more wrong about how humans would respond to such tactics. The true horror of human warfare revealed itself not in brutality but in precision. Captain Nick Foster's tactical team had spent 6 hours systematically destroying the Krek's chain of command. Every enemy officer above squadron leader had been eliminated through targeted strikes that left their soldiers alive but completely lost. The Krek's ground forces had been bred for centuries to follow orders without question. When their commanders died, they had no idea what to do next. Some units wandered aimlessly through the ruins, while others simply stopped fighting altogether. The mighty invasion army was falling apart from the top down. Admiral Kate Williams could have ordered a complete massacre at this point. Her fleet had broken the Krek's formation and could destroy every enemy ship within hours. But humans understood something that most species did not. True victory was not about killing everyone but about winning so completely that the enemy never wanted to fight again. Williams broadcast a message that would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations. She spoke directly to every Krek soldier on every ship and told them their situation. Their leaders were dead. Their fleet was crippled. They had exactly 60 seconds to surrender before the humans demonstrated why Earth's children were feared across 100 worlds. The psychological warfare was more devastating than any weapon. The Kreks had always been the hunters in every conflict they fought. They were the ones who inspired fear and made other species surrender. Now they found themselves on the wrong end of that equation for the first time in their history. Some Kreks units began laying down their weapons immediately. Others tried to retreat but found their escape routes blocked by human forces that seemed to be everywhere at once. The few who kept fighting discovered that resistance only made their situation worse. Overlord Vexthak watched his invasion force collapse from the bridge of his crippled flagship. Half his ships were destroyed or disabled. His ground army was surrendering in massive groups. The humans had not just defeated him but humiliated him completely. In desperation, the Kreks commander made one final gambit. He ordered his remaining forces to begin executing Zephyrian prisoners. If the humans were like other Federation species, they would halt their attack to prevent civilian casualties. Fear of collateral damage had saved many Kreks fleets in the past. The first execution was broadcast on all frequencies. Krek soldiers forced a group of Zephyrian civilians to their knees in front of a burning crystal spire. Children cried for their parents while adults tried to shield them with their own bodies. The scene was designed to break the will of any civilized beings watching. Captain Lucy Anderson received the transmission on the bridge of her heavy cruiser, EFS Liberty. Her ship had been named after her grandfather. As destroyer from the old wars on Earth, she watched the Krek soldiers raise their weapons toward innocent families and felt something cold and deadly settle in her chest. Anderson's response was broadcast on every frequency in the system. She spoke directly to the Kreks forces executing civilians and told them they had just demonstrated why humanity did not take prisoners from their kind. The message was calm and professional but carried the promise of absolute destruction. What followed was not battle, but extermination. Human forces moved with the cold efficiency of a species that had faced extinction twice in its history and emerged stronger each time. Every Krek soldier involved in harming civilians became a priority target for immediate elimination. The Marines on the surface received new orders that came directly from Admiral Williams herself. Any Kreks found threatening civilians was to be killed on sight, with no attempt at capture. Any Kreks position holding prisoners was to be assaulted immediately regardless of cost. The safety of innocent lives was the only priority that mattered. Lieutenant Ben Davis led his squad through the ruins of the Crystal City, where the executions had taken place. They found the Krek soldiers still standing over the bodies of murdered civilians. What happened next was swift and final. Davis did not bother with demands for surrender or attempts to take prisoners. The Kreks learned too late that threatening innocent lives did not deter humans but transformed them into something far worse than monsters. They became the living embodiment of justice itself, cold and merciless and absolutely unstoppable, until every threat to the innocent had been eliminated. Forever, Colonel Maria Santos coordinated rescue operations across the planet while her Marines hunted down every Krek soldier who had harmed civilians. The hunt was methodical and complete. Human forces tracked their targets through underground tunnels and burning cities. They followed them into their ships and bunkers. Nobody escaped. In orbit, the space battle reached its final phase as human ships moved to eliminate the last Kreks vessels. Captain Sam Rodriguez guided his destroyer squadron through the wreckage of what had once been a mighty invasion fleet. The EFS Hellhound and her sisters finished off crippled enemy ships with ruthless efficiency. The Kreks, who had surrendered early and treated their prisoners well, were taken to secure holding areas. They would live to see their homeworlds again. Those who had chosen to harm innocents discovered that human justice was swift and final. There were no second chances for those who murdered children. Admiral Williams monitored the battle from her flagship and felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The Kreks invasion had been completely destroyed, but the cost in Zephyrian lives was still terrible. Beautiful crystal cities lay in ruins and thousands of peaceful beings were dead or missing. But the message had been sent across the galaxy in terms that every species could understand. Earth protected its friends, and the price of threatening them was total annihilation. Any force that chose to harm innocent beings would face the full wrath of humanity's military might. Within 6 hours, every Krek ship in the system was either destroyed or captured. The invasion force that had numbered over 200 vessels simply ceased to exist. Not a single enemy ship escaped to carry word back to the Krex Dominion. The defeat was so complete that it would become legendary. Overlord Vexthak died when his flagship was torn apart by concentrated human fire. His last message to his homeworld was a warning about the monsters they had awakened. He begged his people to avoid any contact with humans or their allies. Some enemies were too dangerous to fight. The Battle of New Haven was over, but its consequences would echo across the galaxy for generations. The Federation's newest members had just demonstrated that they were also its most dangerous. Earth's children had shown the universe what happened when someone threatened their friends. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true nature of humanity to a galaxy that thought it understood Earth's children. The same soldiers who had methodically destroyed an entire invasion force now worked around the clock to dig survivors from the rubble of crystal cities. Warriors who had killed without mercy hours before now carried wounded Zephyrian children to safety with infinite gentleness. Captain Sam Rodriguez stood in the ruins of what had been New Haven's most beautiful district. His destroyer EFS Hellhound had earned its name by sending 7 Krex ships to burning death. Now he personally helped medical teams search through collapsed buildings for survivors. When they found a family of Zephyrians trapped under fallen crystal, he spent 6 hours moving debris with his bare hands. Dr. Alice Murphy was the chief medical officer for the human fleet. She had worked for 48 hours straight, treating both Zephyrian civilians and captured Krex soldiers with equal care. When a Federation news reporter asked why she was helping the enemy, she gave him a look that could freeze space itself. Murphy explained that surrendered soldiers were prisoners, not enemies. They deserved medical treatment according to the rules of war that humans had developed over centuries of conflict. She was a doctor first and a human second, which meant she helped anyone who needed healing regardless of what species they belonged to. The reporter pressed her about whether the Krex deserved mercy after what they had done to innocent civilians. Murphy's response became one of the most quoted statements in galactic history. She said that mercy was not about what people deserved, but about who humans chose to be. They were warriors when they had to be, but healers whenever possible. Admiral Kate Williams received reports from across the planet as rescue operations continued. Human engineers were already working with Zephyrian architects to rebuild the damaged crystal cities. Marine units had established secure perimeters around civilian shelters. Medical teams were treating thousands of wounded beings from both species. The scale of human logistics impressed even veteran Federation observers. Earth's military was not just designed for fighting, but for the complex aftermath of warfare. They had mobile hospitals and construction equipment. They carried supplies for refugee camps and personnel trained in civilian rescue. Operations Commander Jake Morrison walked through the largest Zephyrian refugee camp and saw something that would stay with him forever. A human soldier named Private Danny White was playing simple games with a group of Zephyrian children who had lost their parents. The kids did not speak the same language, but laughter needed no translation. White noticed Morrison watching and looked embarrassed about being caught playing instead of working. The commander told him to carry on and walked away feeling proud of his species. These were the moments that defined humanity better than any battle or victory. The willingness to comfort alien children who were scared and alone. The Galactic Federation finally arrived a week after the crisis had ended. Their massive relief fleet dropped out of hyperspace expecting to find a war zone. Instead, they discovered the situation completely under control, with human forces managing everything from security to medical care to reconstruction efforts. Admiral Zachtel of the Centauri commanded the Federation relief fleet. He was a pompous bureaucrat who had spent the past week organizing committees and filing paperwork while civilians died. His first action was to demand an explanation for human military action without proper authorization. Williams met the Federation commander in the ruins of New Haven's government center. The building had been one of the most beautiful structures in the galaxy before Krex weapons turned it into rubble. Zephyrian officials were already working with human engineers to plan its reconstruction. Zachtel lectured Williams about proper procedures and chain of command. He reminded her that Federation members were supposed to request permission before taking military action. Unauthorized interventions could destabilize the entire galactic political structure. There would have to be investigations and hearings and formal reprimands. Williams listened to the lecture in silence while watching human soldiers help Zephyrian families search through the wreckage of their homes. When the Centauri finished talking, she gave him a response that became legendary throughout the Federation. She told him that Earth had acted under the authority of being the only ones who showed up when children were being murdered. If the Federation had a problem with humans saving innocent lives, they were welcome to file a complaint. Earth would respond to it after they finished building monuments to honor the species who had been too civilized to prevent genocide. The Centauri commander had no answer to that logic. The Zephyrians held a ceremony 3 days later to thank their human rescuers. The survivors gathered in the largest remaining crystal amphitheater to honor the warriors who had crossed the galaxy to save them. Their leader, Kelnara, spoke words that would be remembered forever. She announced that the capital city would be renamed New Earth in honor of their saviors. The crystal spires would be rebuilt stronger than before and dedicated to the friendship between their species. Future generations of Zephyrians would learn about the day that Earth's monsters came to protect the innocent. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy and watched by billions of beings. They saw human soldiers standing at attention, while alien children placed flower crowns on their heads. They watched warriors who had destroyed an invasion fleet now helping to plant new gardens in the ruins. Morrison received word that the Krex Dominion was requesting immediate peace negotiations. Their fourth fleet had been completely annihilated by a force 1/10 its size. The military leadership was terrified of facing human forces again. They wanted to negotiate boundaries and non-aggression pacts before more of their fleets disappeared. The political implications were staggering. The Krex had been one of the most feared military powers in the galaxy. Their defeat by a small human force would shift the balance of power across dozens of star systems. Species that had lived in fear of Krex raids could now sleep peacefully. But the most important change was in how other species viewed humanity. Earth's children were no longer seen as friendly newcomers to galactic civilization. They were recognized as something far more significant and dangerous, a species that fought not for conquest or glory but for the simple principle that no one should threaten their friends. William stood on the observation deck of the EFS Reaper watching human engineers help rebuild Zephyrian cities. Commander Morrison joined her and asked the question that was haunting military philosophers across the galaxy. What kind of monsters were they really? Williams did not hesitate in her answer. They were the kind of monsters the universe needed. When darkness came for the innocent, someone had to stand in its way. If protecting the helpless made them monsters, then they were monsters on the right side of history. The human fleet prepared to return to Earth knowing that everything had changed. Humanity had announced itself not as conquerors seeking territory, but as guardians protecting the weak. In a galaxy full of ancient empires and proud civilizations that might be the most terrifying thing of all, the message was clear to every species watching. Earth's children had chosen their role in galactic civilization. They would be the ones who answered when innocent voices cried for help across the stars. And anyone who threatened those voices would face the monsters that humanity could become.